It's fall in New York City, and that means Old Man Winter is on his way. And with Old Man Winter coming, it means a slow tapering of the rental market for its seasonal slumber. Today on Managing Manhattan, we're going to talk about the tips and tricks to guide you through the slow season in rentals. We have two expert guests who are going to help guide us all the way. I want to welcome to Managing Manhattan, Ariel Dagan. Ariel Dagan is a 20-year veteran in real estate. He's conducted more than 3,000 transactions in his career and is a founder, along with his partner Dan Karp, of the Karp Dagan team over at Compass.
Thank you for having me, Dylan.
Thanks for coming. We also have Ben Willig. Ben is a top agent who has helped several companies go from a loss to profitability. He's the CEO of his own consulting company, Willig Collaborative, and he's also the new managing director of agent growth and strategy at Brown Harris Stevens.
Yeah.
Ben, welcome to Manhattan.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
It's great to see you. I know we've done some podcasts together,
Yeah.
and I'm super excited for this episode because I speak to you both regularly, and you're such experts on the field of rentals. So I know every time I have a problem, I call a lot of Ariel, I call Ben sometimes to help guide me through what to do.
A lot of therapy. Apartment therapy.
That's the job of the broker, though, at this point, right? You're really part-time therapist and part-time broker.
All therapists. And rentals is more stressful than sales for people. So, yeah.
I agree with
It's a tough
that.
business. So,
Absolutely, especially with some of these clients. Like, clients don't want to listen. The tenant doesn't want to listen. So,
well, it's a bigger amount of their money.
yeah.
You know, it moves at a faster pace. So it's a lot of stress for people moving into a rental apartment. So that's what people like Ariel and all of our folks here, trying to help people out with. So
Supply's limited. People are climbing over each other. This
Have
is
y'all
New York
seen a
City.
more insane rental market, though? Like, between the past couple of years, it's like curveball after curveball, and it just makes it more expensive, less supply, more insane, and more like hyped up on emotion.
It every year it gets crazier and crazier, for sure.
Yeah.
Prices go higher and higher, less and less inventory in the peak season. People are clamoring over each other during the peak season to try to get an apartment. It's not uncommon for us to get 9, 10, 12 applications. Actually makes our job a lot harder because then we have to actually look at all those apps and decide who's the best applicant out of these 9 to 12 people who just applied.
Yeah. And then,
no, go ahead.
and then the owner immediately thinks you underprice it because there's so much
Correct.
demand, and you hit a home run by getting so many applications, and they yell at you. They're like, we should have gone higher on the rent, which sometimes is not your friend when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Totally.
So I want to start with an important question, and this is a question I get all the time. And we know there's a high season for rentals, which is, let's call it March to, early August. We have a slow season for rentals, which let's call it, late October through February. And people always ask me, what is the fluctuation on rent? Because you always want to hit the high season. But let's say I'm going to launch a rental now. We're almost in October. What would you say that fluctuation would be on the price between the high season and the low season?
Well, typically what you see, and you've seen like the last few years, is it goes up in the high season and just kind of like levels off and then goes up again the next high season.
Right.
And so what I always kind of tell folks is that, look, the high season, you're going to have more supply and more inventory coming out.
Right.
And also more demand like that 9, 10 applications. And, one of the reasons why the price regulates is because a lot of landlords time their leases to come due during that peak season. So there's a lot less inventory. So when you have less supply, you're going to have fewer options to choose from. And, it's still going to be very competitive. And, maybe there's less of maybe your perfect apartment if you're a consumer looking during that time of year. So, there are instances where you might see some incentives come on, maybe, some free rent here and there and things come off, maybe, 5, 10% or so. But for the most part, there's just kind of like a leveling off. And people are able to usually go on maybe a few more searches as opposed to like just having to apply for something the first day. So I don't,
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. I mean, I would say roughly the difference in pricing from the summer to the winter months is 10%, let's call it.
At most, right?
At
And
most.
I know we're
At
trying to
most,
quantify
yeah.
the unquantifiable.
Correct.
But
And I don't think it's so much a supply side issue as much as it is a demand side issue. There's supply out there in the winter. There just isn't the demand that is asking for that supply. And exactly like Ben said, most landlords have their apartments come up in the summer, and most of that's driven by family events, whether it's schooling, college ending, people moving to the city to get a new job. And they end up on that schedule for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And they just don't have the need to move in the wintertime. So the supply is there, but it's a demand issue at the end of the day that's causing that price drop.
Right, absolutely. And the whole premise for this episode is something I think about a lot. When this scenario actually happened a year ago, a broker had launched a rental at, let's call it $20,000 in the height of the season. The owner agreed, and then it didn't rent. And then the owner refused to drop price. So like, you told me 20, I want to get 20. And we kept inching closer and closer to the fall and winter season, to the point where offers were coming in lower. The owner, we finally convinced her to drop the price a little bit. But you start to get to this period of, let's call it, mid-October, where demand really slows down.
Sure.
And, that $20,000 apartment might not be $20,000. Well, first of all, obviously we didn't get it in the first place, and the offers come in lower, and we have less traffic and less people interested. So, we're calling this episode The Save, and how to rescue your fall and winter rental, because what do you do at that point? We're at a slower portion of the market. What do you do? And most importantly, Ariel, like, why does fall and winter expose the cracks? And I think we kind of hit on it a little bit. When you have a lot of demand in the summer, it's emotion driven in a lot of cases. But
right.
How does the fall and winter really expose more cracks for these rentals?
I mean, again, like I said, real estate's a supply and demand issue for the most part. That's what drives, people renting apartments, purchasing apartments. And in the wintertime, there's just way less demand than necessary. And what's important in those instances for a landlord to pay attention to is the product, the pricing, how they're positioning the apartment within the market. So just driving into each of those. Pricing has to be realistic, right? If your price is not realistic, you're not going to end up renting. There's just other landlords that are out there, there's supply that's out there that people are going to take. The apartment, the product itself, if it's not painted, if it's not cleaned, if it's not presenting in the best light, you're just reducing your chances of getting it rented.
In all cases,
right?
In
all cases.
Because landlords sometimes say, oh, well, if I get an offer, I'll consider doing it, but you're too late to the game to do it at that point.
Right.
People buy with emotion, justify with logic.
Yeah.
So,
correct.
No.
And then, the last thing is really how you're positioned, right? A lot of people get stuck on price, just like you spoke about. It's $20,000, I want my $20,000. So I think the important thing here is, looking at things instead of on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis. If you're a condo owner and it sits for another month, you just lost a month of rent that you will never get back. So the way I try to position it to people is, you either take, the $180,000 now or the $200,000, that you're going to try to get, that you're going to end up with $160,000 for in a month from now. And when landlords kind of look at things from the standpoint of a yearly rent versus a monthly rent, sometimes things, change around and they're able to open up and actually rent the apartment.
No, absolutely. And it's something we hear all the time. And the landlord says, I want the $20,000, but then it sits vacant for a month or two. And bear in mind, a month is equal to what? 8.3%.
Correct.
So every month you're sitting vacant, you're artificially lowering your rental income by 8.3.
Correct.
So we can maybe apply that to the drop, save ourselves a lot of money, a lot of stress and
100%.
Worry, and still get it done. So Ben, we hear this all the time. You hear this all the time. Owners don't love to reduce price, right? And they need to reduce price. The market tells you they have to reduce price. What are the metrics, and walk us through the scenario when you're trying to build trust with the owner and convincing them just drop the price? And from a logical point of view, we know this. New York is very efficient, supply and demand. That's the only economic factor that really matters here. But how do you convey that to an owner?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think you have to have a deep level of trust, first of all. I think a lot of landlords in New York City don't really have patience. So you also have to have trust and be able to know how to communicate that with the patients. I think the free rent and how we get across everything from like a net effective basis, that's why when you look at the metrics in New York City, like I talked about earlier, you don't actually see like in the Miller-Samuels reports or Greg Heim stuff or anything like rents drop that much. But effectively they're 5 or 10% because people are offering some of that free rent, and things like that to make it more appealing. Sometimes I think if you can reposition, like Ariel said, it's like, hey, what if we're doing X, Y, Z, right? How can we? I've seen a lot of brokers maybe not take the best care in terms of pictures or staging or things that you would do with a sale for, a $20,000 rental is pretty significant, but you could do that for a $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000 rental too. So as a broker, I think you want to be invested as well in how are you going to reposition, how are you going to give, and really look at it as you're coming alongside your owner in that conversation. I always try and get them thinking like, hey, what do you think you would want to do based on, X, Y, and Z. I think we can do this, right? So you're really in it with them together to really build that trust.
Right.
And have the price become, an option, net effect it down a little bit lower, understand why they want a higher price, right? Because a lot of times for them, if the reason why is because they need a higher rent roll to show to a bank and things like that. That's where some of that free rent, and how it's structured it, you have to be a little
they promise
careful.
a higher rent too.
Right. Long term and for the renewals and things like that. There are ways to do it and really be asking them, what are they hoping to achieve? What's most important to them? Get them off of necessarily that price discussion, come at it with what you're going to do to reposition, get it higher up on the aggregator sites, invest in that property. And if we can do this, like the combination of those things coming together sometimes can really make that difference in that, save, let's call it.
I agree with Ben. And one of the things that we see all the time is people come in and ask for a 2-year or 3-year lease, right? Or they'll ask for a 12-month lease. And in those instances, you could renegotiate the terms of the lease to try to get that landlord from the winter back onto the summer months.
Yep.
Right, which is very important, right?
Signing an 18-month lease. And the way that I position it to the landlords that we work with is, look, you're getting a lower rent today, but I'm getting you back into the summer cycle, and you're going to get 10% more next year, and then for your entire hold period, assuming that you re-rent it efficiently every year thereafter. And I think that getting landlords to see that the value is not just in the price, but in actually the terms that you're negotiating with someone is very critical. And a lot of people are short-sighted on that. They anchor to price, and they don't move off of it in order to get the best, possible terms that they can for themselves.
Right, absolutely. Okay, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business, and it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
Hi, I'm Dylan Pichulik, CEO of XL Real Property Management, New York's most trusted name in luxury property management since 2012. We specialize in managing individual apartments, townhouses, and rental buildings held by absentee owners. We maintain our properties with the highest standards of quality and service so that owners can choose a hassle-free approach to real estate investing. Rented or owner-occupied, we handle it all. For more information, contact us at xl-rpm.com. Okay, so we're talking about how we build trust with an owner when it comes time to reduce the price. And Ben, you were talking about something very important, which is the repositioning of the apartment. And I think the biggest sign that it's time to do some sort of fluff or repositioning to the apartment is when you start getting offers with conditions. Okay, I want a 3-year lease and I want to be able to renovate the kitchen. You're going to pay for it, yada, yada, yada. So when you start to get these, and you'll get them in mass, especially the longer they sit on the market,
yes,
the more room the tenant thinks they have to negotiate. So, on the same apartment we just talked about, the $20,000 one, when we started getting offers from 20 down to 13, and I'm going to renovate the kitchen or the bathroom, or I'm going to do the hardwood floors myself, that's like the official sign that, okay, it might be time to reposition, but maybe the landlord doesn't want to do work, and we have to talk about price reduction. How long do you wait before you have that discussion of, okay, I think we're we have a market inefficiency here. We might need to talk price chops. How long do you wait?
So, I mean, I think most problems can be prevented by proper pre-framing. So I tell that all the time to people. So, you know, if I trace that back to the beginning, it's how do you actually set the expectations in the beginning, I think, with that landlord, and what is your price strategy throughout? You know, hey, we're going to come out with this if this happens, you know, and what is that going to look like over the course of everything?
So map it out in advance.
Most problems can be prevented by proper pre-framing. I mean, you know, because also, you know, the nice thing about, you know, price, because is someone coming like that because they're a good tenant and they are really trying to make it work? You know, I remember my first rental client ever, and just tell like a fun, you know, story here, was an attorney. And I was helping them on the rental side of things. Yeah. Oh God, you know where this is going. And similar like that, they, you know, I get it from the industry they come from. They redline everything and put all these different, you know, comments in and stuff. And I'm like, I don't really think you can do this in the, you know, the lease. You know, I'm a new agent. Yeah. But it's 2009 and the market's down. So we're like, oh, whatever. We get to the landlord's office and they literally tear the lease up, you know, in front of the client and don't want to take, you know, the attorney. Like, you know, people also have to keep in mind New York City is very, very, you know, low vacancy. So if you can drive a lot of that demand and also find a good quality tenant, speaking to that owner's, you know, emotions of like, hey, what is it going to be like, you know, if we have to fish around for people who are like, you know, this, and you're dealing with that throughout the term of your lease and you're having to fix stuff, and
it's a headache, probably very expensive for the landlord at the same time.
And so how can you, you know, have the landlord connect those dots on that for like what they might experience too, if you're already in the situation, I think is key, because by dropping price, that's going to give us more options, maybe some really good tenants who are going to be great. Like, do you want to take a little bit less and not have headaches? And how much is your time worth?
Right.
You know, throughout the course. And a lot of these people who own expensive apartments, they're doing other, you know, things in the world and have other things going on that are better use of their time than, you know, scrubbing the toilet bowls with a toothbrush or something. So
yeah, but also if you're getting, you know, 10 grand on rent, but you have a high maintenance tenant who, you know, we're constantly having to
it costs you a
repair,
lot more.
we're burning $1,000 a month on repairs. Like, we haven't done ourselves one bit of favor.
I call it return on hassle.
Yeah.
Right? It's do you want an extra on this $20,000 apartment, $1,000, $2,000 to have this hassle?
Yeah.
A tenant who's just going to be a headache, who's just going to give you trouble, who, if they know how to work the system, could end up paying no rent for a year, 2 years, 3 years. We've seen that on our side of the business, where I've been in situations where landlords have taken tenants and not collected rent for 3 years trying to get them out.
And we have that as well. And by the way, every time we have that situation, I will say, because there's a lot of gloom and doom in the Post and everybody else, we love to talk about deadbeat tenants. It always comes down to not properly screening the tenant.
100%.
On top of it, you were in a rush, or your apartment's out on the market for too long, and
desperate.
This is the only person that came along.
Yeah.
Let it sit vacant for another few days.
100%.
Run the credit 100%, because all this stuff comes out on the credit report. But like, do not sign up for that risk. And then also, when you start to get these deals with caveats, or I'll renovate this, or I'll do that as a tenant, we don't want those deals as landlords.
100%.
We're now putting a tenant in control of a renovation project. They don't know how to do it. Their interests are not aligned with your interests. Like, they don't care how much it costs to replace the refrigerator. They just want a new refrigerator. So, and it creates huge liability issues. So I'd rather see you drop the price a little bit than take a, you know, which is funny because I'm that tenant who will easily go in and try and make you a deal, but I'm a landlord. Like, this is what I do, and I know that I'm adding value by doing it. My wife yells at me every single time we rent an apartment because I want to rip the thing to shreds and we live in dust, but at least I know what I'm doing, and my goal is to add value for everybody, myself, the landlord involved, but like, really as a landlord, don't take those deals. It's too much risk, and we don't want you renovating
I always find
apartment.
like how someone behaves, like a tenant behaves during that application process is usually very indicative of how they're going to be as a tenant.
Oh, for sure. The ones who are like pressuring you, let's go, normally have like hidden defects in the credit report. They are trying to push you past, you know, having time to look at, and their attitude. We just had this over in Soho where the tenant was, you know, pushing us in an unnatural way and then the owner still let him move in, and now everything is a complaint. And why didn't you respond to my email from 10 minutes ago? It's like, you know, we still have no reasonable time to respond to these.
You got to do a little bit of a sniff test.
Perfect. So Ben, what presentation tweaks deliver the biggest winter hit? I know like in the summertime, it's a little bit easier. If you have an outdoor space, you throw some plants out there, you highlight the exterior portions of the apartment. Is there anything we can do in winter to highlight the apartment better?
Well,
maybe a pumpkin spice candle or two?
I mean, there are studies that show, cinnamon flavors and things like that. If you have it in the oven, help when people walk in. But I'll go back to, so there's the in-person experience and there's the online experience, right?
Uh-huh.
And both play at different pieces of things, right? And so I'll kind of just hit on, a couple of both. So let's just take in person for a second. We just said before, people buy with emotion and justify with logic. So usually within a split second, people know deep down whether that's their apartment when they walk through the door.
Right when you walk in.
Right when you walk in. So if you're an agent and you're not playing for that moment when they walk through the door, right? And so the thing might be like, hey, this looks out onto, a barbed wire fence, which I've seen before with, some apartments. Well, if you don't have anything else in the apartment, attention is going to go right to there.
Right.
Right. A fresh, paint job. And if you're an agent, you should know which paints like reflect light the best so that it's a bright feeling on the inside, right? If you go with a, off yellow paint that some previous tenant had used or whatever the case might be versus like a Chantilly white from Benjamin Moore that's going to reflect the right light and switch the lights out.
Oh, do you have that color code?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
OC65.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Right, like you should know these things as an agent because it's simple fixes and things like that to give the landlord that, again, what you're playing for is that first feel, right? So switching out certain light fixtures and things like that. There are inexpensive things or things they're going to have to do anyways that are going to help it present in person a lot better, even if you're not doing staging and things like that. Now let's take the online experience for a second, right? So we had an apartment, we've had many apartments like this, but I remember one specifically years ago with a sponsor and developer we worked with, and a tenant had moved out. And they just would always hammer us, like, we want to rent it while they're still in there, no matter how many times we tried to tell them that, like, it's a little better once they move out and we're not, photographing with the tenant stuff. And I didn't have enough oversight on the agent. They just put it up with some pictures of, previous tenant stuff. It's messy. It's just not done to the level of quality that, I would usually, expect. But they were like, thought it was going to move quickly because it was like that end of the season, got a little lazy. And then as soon as we virtually decluttered, put nice pictures in, like really took the care on that online side of things, you saw all the views from the online traffic because what do the online aggregators want? People that are going to click on more things and spend more time on the nice properties are what they want to move up through the systems. So you have to know and be familiar with all these, aspects. And we watched it jumped in multiple applications like right away after that in terms of the activities and showings as soon as those things were swapped out. Right. So, all of that is very, very important if you haven't paid enough detail on the, just online presentation as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think, painting probably has the highest ROI, and I can't tell you how many owners just don't want to paint. And
you have to do it.
You have to do it.
You have to do it anyways.
I'll tell you something. The quotes that I'm seeing now out of contractors is out of control.
Labor, insurance, everything went sky high.
Yeah. But it's something that is a must. It is something that is I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone sign a lease thinking painting is a standard requirement and that the apartment would come that way.
Right.
When it wasn't even negotiated or anything. In the consumer's mind, this is a must-have standard.
Yeah, but also I will say, like, we have this scenario a lot, and it was all mismanaged expectations, and people hate to bring it up because I'm like, we need to be on the same page regarding the expectation of the apartment.
Yes.
Because the last thing you want is a tenant showing up, thought it was going to be painted,
100%.
It's not painted, and now we have a fight. Inevitably, we're going to have to paint it anyway, but now it's more expensive. The tenant's upset. I'm going to work around their stuff. It's going to take me a longer time. You have to do it. And people say, well, don't bring it up. They didn't ask for it. But not that I want to put an idea in their head, but the last thing I want is a tenant moving in and they're upset.
I have a question for you, Dylan. Like, in taking on the property, I find a lot of times with agents, right? And let's give benefit of the doubt here. Maybe they bought it thinking they were going to live on it. They didn't think they were going to be a landlord. So no one ever took the time to walk the owner of this apartment
Or they just
through.
closed. It was okay for the sake of the sale walkthrough, but not necessarily for a
For whatever
tenant
reason,
walkthrough.
there was an expectation. So, like, I find a lot of owners just like don't factor in turnover costs into being a landlord and then get surprised with these types of things and then want to find ways around it. Like, when you're taking on a property management
You mean
agreement,
like magic wipes or magic erasers on the walls instead of a paint job?
Right. I think you raise an important point of like most problems can be prevented by proper free. How do you set the expectations when you're taking on like an apartment to manage like that, right? If an agent maybe didn't, for whatever reason, maybe, good reasons too.
We always talk to our clients about this because, look, is it a legal requirement that you have to hand the tenant a freshly painted apartment? And the answer is no. If there's a tenant, the only law is if you have a tenant in possession for more than 3 years, they have the right to request a paint job at your expense. But there's no law that says it, but the market standard expects it.
Correct.
And, there are some places where the walls are just a little bit banged up and a little scuff here, scuff
Yeah,
there.
but Dylan, they left, the picture is like,
then they went the last
the
edit
couch and all
yeah.
these things are way more damaged than usual.
Cleanliness and paint is all subjective, right? It goes down to cleaning too. Like I walk into apartments all the time where I'm like, this is not clean, but for someone else it might be clean, and for someone else it's the most filthy thing on earth.
Everybody has a different tolerance.
And everyone has a different tolerance for it. But at bare minimum, if you are a landlord, you need to paint the apartment, you need to then clean the apartment, and everything needs to look sparkly clean.
People will pay much more money for it. They'll walk in and be like, this is home, instead of like, I guess I can make this work.
It's also how they're going to return the apartment to
you, it sets the expectation of how this is going to go. And if I as a landlord don't care, you as a tenant aren't going to care. All right, we're going to take another short break, but we'll be right back.
Residential and commercial closings to litigation, Romer DeBoss is your full-service real estate law firm. We blend big firm knowledge with boutique-level attention, delivering outcomes that exceed every expectation. Contact us at romerdeboss.com.
I'm Brian Scott Cohen, one of the top loan originators in the country, and the #1 mortgage originator at Guaranteed Rate Affinity. Guaranteed Rate Affinity arguably has the most advanced tech in the industry. Our completely digital loan process makes it easy and efficient for homeowners, from a 15-minute pre-approval to the digital application and through closing. My team and I would love to help you get into the home of your dreams.
All right, we're back. So we're talking market expectation, and Ariel's right and Ben's right. We have to paint the apartments because it really sets the expectation.
And clean.
And cleaned. And if something is broken, it's got to be fixed.
Correct.
There's a clause in the lease, fixtures and appliances have to be in working order. And if it's not going to be fixed, again, going back to, we don't want to put ideas in the tenant's head, but there's a whole section on the revenue lease now on Exhibit A. What work is the landlord going to be doing? Fill it out. Because, again, you don't want the tenant showing up and having mismanaged expectations, and now all of a sudden lawyers are being drug in and suing out of the lease and all this other stuff. And inevitably, we're going to end up fixing it probably because that's going to be the path of least resistance and the least expensive for the landlord. But if we're all on the same page, hey, maybe you're not going to paint the apartment. That's fine. But let's all be on the same page. So days on market are creeping up. We've had the apartment on the market for 30 days, maybe 45 days. What do we do at that point? Because I know when I'm looking online at a listing, as someone who understands the superior efficiency of the rental market, if the product is great, that thing is gone in 2 days.
Right.
And you immediately make the appointment, you're like, to go find out what's wrong with the apartment because it's been on the market for 45 days. What do you do in that case?
Oh, man, I think we need to address the elephant in the room first, right? Which is, look, there's some things that might be less than transparent that, look, we might be all aware of that agents do, right, in terms of listing different apartment numbers and things like that then reset the days on market. I don't advocate for that because I do think there's ways to actually be transparent with the consumer and how you run your business and what you get from, referrals, and keeping with transparency and playing for the long term is going to mean much more than just that singular, deal, because all that stuff sort of comes out over time, right? So albeit those types of things, like, look, they happen all the time. There are other ways, I think, to kind of like reset, start fresh. Convey the message. A lot of the things that we already, talked about, right, in terms of the repositioning and price and, cleaning it up and doing these types of things. There's also like a lot of different things you can do from a marketing perspective as well, right? So there's different aggregators and sites that get different types of traffic. Knowing how to maximize those and feature on some of those sites. Like, we've had a lot of great success with apartments.com over the years, over Street Easy if it's in certain, price points, Ren Hop, and knowing and being familiar with how a lot of those work, and are there different ones that maybe you didn't look at and you can get them out on where it's going to be fresh on those, even though it might not be fresh on, a particular, like a Street Easy or things like that. So I think there's a lot of ways that we talked about, and with that type of stuff to, again, reposition, maybe have it fresh in certain places and things like that. Again, if you kind of have a strategy for that, if that happens in a worst case scenario, we'd always set with the team that, every apartment rents in 30 days. That's the expectation I set with every owner.
30 days? Is
Yeah.
There's no reason in New York it should be any longer.
There's no reason it should be longer than 30 days.
There's a misalignment somewhere otherwise.
100%. And there's got to be a discussion 2 weeks, 30 days, and 45 days. And it falls into one of the buckets. It's either product, pricing, positioning. And, I do think days on market impacts unit owners way more than they realize.
Oh yeah.
And that impact, in my opinion, as the listing agent, I take the opposite stance as Ben, respectfully.
Well, no, and I want to say something, because if you're just going to change the apartment number for the sake of lowering your days on market, I think it might be one thing. But I know in a lot of cases we've told the owner what to do. They didn't take your advice, and now we're sitting in the market for 30 days.
Yeah.
We then decide we're going to do some sort of repositioning. How is it more ethical to change the apartment number in those cases where you actually it's the same apartment but you've repositioned it?
My plug for Street Easy and Rebney and all the aggregators and things like that is they just changed the sales to 30 days off the market. I think they should
from 90.
Right, from 90
for the audience.
Yeah, for people who don't know, I think they should allow the ability for rentals to be 7 days or so.
Right.
It would be what I would advocate for, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, Street Easy just changed it from 90 to 30. Not only that, they took the days on market, and instead of having it front and center right next to the price,
it's buried now, right?
It's buried.
Yeah.
Because they're realizing the effect that this is having on their
Data
landlords
quality.
and the data quality, right? So they are just pushing it down lower onto the page. So, at the end of the day, the person who is listing the apartment represents the owner.
Right.
They have to do what's in the owner's best interest.
To
Now,
give
you
the highest
you
price.
might call it unethical or ethical, but whatever you want to call it, you have to do what's in your owner's best interest. And Street Easy is there to serve the consumer. It's there to serve the buyer and the renter at the end of the day. They are taking that buyer's information, they're selling it so that, they can make money and buyer's agent can make money and they could be represented. And on the landlord side, on the rental side, they are giving the listing agent that contact, but they're charging them for it. And maybe that's why they've buried it down low.
Right.
Now, some of the things that an owner could do just besides changing the unit number to get days on market from whatever it is to 0, change the first photo. Take new photos.
Maybe you had bad photos and it didn't represent the apartment, and you decided, okay, let me actually invest in
100%.
a better marketing strategy.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So new photos, maybe adding a video to the apartment could help change things so that you're not just running there with leads who are not interested in the apartment. And I also think having a story behind the apartment is really important, right? A lot of agents walk in and go, that's the kitchen, that's the bathroom. It's like,
The tenant can see
obviously.
that.
But
You gotta
what's
tell
the
people what they
story?
don't know.
What do they not know about this apartment? Was there a tenant in place who didn't let the broker in while it was listed?
Well, that's another thing. The tenant didn't let me in for 30 or
30
45 days because their baby napped and I work from home and whatever.
Ariel, I'd be curious, right, if I'm a tenant who's listening, right, to this, I think the perception amongst a lot of tenants is, if it's been on the market, and there's probably some that figure out that an apartment number's been changed or whatever, right? A lot of people come in and they just assume something is wrong if it's out on the market. You represent a lot of apartments. Like, is that true? Is there something wrong with it if that's the case, like those apartments, or what percentage, is there?
I mean, people walk in and they automatically assume days on market, I could beat this person up, and there's something
There's
wrong
a problem.
with, there's a problem with
You're going
the
to find the
apartment.
problem instead of, I love the apartment, let me go see it. You're going to find a problem.
And there might not be a problem. It could be
In my
a
experience,
product.
like 90% of the time,
It's-
95% of the time,
right.
there's no problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really important for the agent to be able to express why that is happening and position it in a way that's palatable to the tenant, so that they're not going, "Where's the skeleton in here?"
Right.
Right? Because there may not be a skeleton in that apartment. It's just the owner was either unrealistic, or B, the tenant was difficult for access, or C, it might be something like it wasn't cleaned originally and then it became cleaned, or there was scaffolding outside the window and we just didn't delist it and weren't showing it as much, or it just came down. It could be one of a million things, but the agent's job is to convey the story, because I personally think every apartment has numbers and story. And sometimes the numbers have to make sense, but a lot of times the story overtakes those numbers and really pushes an apartment forward, and that's part of sales.
And I think where people should be more concerned with, like, is there a problem in an apartment, is not the days on market, because 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, it's one of those things. The only instances I've seen where there's like actual problems in an apartment, I remember major landlord, they were renting like a basement apartment years ago. I remember showing it as an early agent, and it was bottom floor with like practically no windows. Right. So there'd be a great rent and people would get a great deal. But if you looked at the past history on that apartment, it turned over every single year because you go insane with no light.
Yeah.
So if you see an apartment turning over every year, and maybe multiple times a year because people are breaking leases, like, that's probably the bigger indicator that there's something going on. Not that just it didn't, it sat on the market for
No,
a little
that's an
longer.
important point, actually.
Yeah.
If the apartment's always turning over, why? And look, especially in smaller categories of apartments, we probably have more turnover. It's harder for, a larger apartment. Typically, there's more
shares are
occupants
going to
to
turn
move.
over
Yeah.
more, things like that. But there's that.
But if every year that basement apartment or ground floor
there's like a
apartment's
0.02% of apartments that are like that. It's
Yeah.
a very small number, and that almost throw out the days on market because it's owners are just silly with higher pricing or tenant being difficult and things like that. I think that's the important message for people to get across, and for agents to communicate, like Ariel said, to people coming through.
Absolutely. Well, guys, this was incredibly insightful, and I hope these tips and tricks will help guide all the agents and owners that are watching this episode. Thank you so much for watching Manage Manhattan. We'll see you next time.